Hi, welcome to Core Java for Beginners Part 7. In this video, we are going to look at constructors and we are going to have an introduction about inheritance. So let us go to the video and we will see what are constructors now. Constructors in Java is a special type of method that is used to initialize an object. Java constructor is invoked at the time of object creation. Constructors are member methods which has the same name as a class. It will not have any return value and you don't even mention void before the function. There are different types of constructors. One is default constructor and the other one is going to be parameterized constructor. So let us take some example here to understand what are constructors and how to write the constructors in the Java program, and we will also see how it is going to be used in the main. So constructors are the methods which has the same name as a class here and it will not have any return value. So if you look at the class rectangle, you have private integer length and breadth. So we have seen about this rectangle program in the previous videos also. So you have length and breadth and you define a method. This is basically a method but it has the same name as a class. So class name is also rectangle and I am saying rectangle open bracket close bracket and within that I am writing something here. Okay, and so I am writing system.out.println. This is the default constructor. And I am also writing another constructor called as rectangle. How it is called as a rectangle here? Because rectangle is the name of the class. With the same name I am writing another function, but this time I am differentiating this rectangle and this rectangle by passing these two parameters here. This rectangle doesn't have any parameters passed to it, but this rectangle has two parameters which is passed here. Okay, so how I am going to use this rectangle here? I will pass length and breadth and I will assign this length and breadth to the data members of the rectangle class. Okay, so let us see that how this can be written in the program. We will go to NetBeans. We will start a new project. It's a Java application. We will call it as constructors. So it is creating a program now. Okay, a project is created. Now the name of the program is con.java. Here the class name is also con and it is going to be a public class. Within the public class only you have a main program. Now I am going to write a method here. I am going to declare a class here, class rectangle. Okay, this class rectangle has private integer length, private integer breadth. Okay, and what I am going to do is I am going to define the constructor here. So the constructor is nothing but it is a method. Okay, but it will have the same name as the class. So what I will do is I will say rectangle is the name of the class. I am using the same name to define a function here and this is going to be a function. It's a method and this method, okay, I can write something inside this one, system.out.println. So what I am doing is I am just saying inside default constructor. Okay, so if I write this one, maybe I will say that this is, I am saying this inside default constructor because to understand that when this rectangle method will be called, just to understand that one I have written this println statement. But otherwise what I can do is I can just also do some more activity like length and breadth, I can make it as 0. Okay. So I am using this constructor, a rectangle open bracket close bracket, to initialize the values of L and B, length and breadth. Okay. I can also write one more constructor, but it should be different. I am going to say integer L comma integer B. So this rectangle is also a constructor because it is having the same name as the class. So it is also a constructor, but it is different from the previously returned constructor because here I am not passing any value, but here I am passing 2 values to the rectangle class. Now in this one I am going to say length is equal to L and breadth is equal to B. Okay, and just to understand whether this has been executed or not, I am going to say that system.out.println, I am going to say it is a initialize constructor. Okay, so either we can say initialize constructor or it can be a parameterized constructor. As we have seen in the slides, there are 2 different types of Java constructor. One is going to be default constructor, other one is going to be parameterized constructor here. So whatever I have written here, it is a initialize constructor or parameterized constructor. Okay, and this is going to be called as a default constructor. Default constructor doesn't take any value to the method or it doesn't return any value. Rectangle also, this one is also a constructor, but it takes 2 values to initialize this L and B. Okay, so how will I use this constructor? Constructors we are not going to use with a name, we are just going to define the object, and whenever you instantiate the object, then only the constructors will be called, the corresponding constructor will be called. So now let me declare R1 comma R2. There are 2 reference variable R1 and R2 which is created, which is of type rectangle. Okay, when I am doing this, what is going to happen here? When I am just running the application, it doesn't do anything. Neither of this rectangle is called, nor rectangle integer L and integer B is called here, just it is coming out. So at the time of declaring the variables of rectangle type, that is the reference variables of rectangle type, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't call any constructor. But if I say R1 is equal to new of rectangle, this is what we are doing by doing this new rectangle. I am instantiating an object of rectangle class. So when I say R1 is equal to new of rectangle, which means that I am having an object of rectangle and that object's reference is put in R1. So now when I am running this application, you see here what is happening. The output, it says that I am inside the default constructor. So the default constructor is called. So by default, whenever I declare any object with new rectangle open bracket close bracket, which means that I will be calling the default constructor. When will I call this initialize constructor or parameterized constructor? If you do like this, when I say R1 R2 is equal to new of rectangle, at the time of defining the rectangle itself, what I am going to do is, I can also do like this. If I say R2 is equal to new of rectangle, it will 2 times this constructor will be called, default constructor will be called, because of this type. In case if you wanted to initialize at the time of creation, if I want to store 10 and 20 for length and breadth at the time of instantiating the object itself, then you can give new of rectangle 10 comma 20. So if I run this application, what is going to happen here? It says that for the first declaration, that is R1 is equal to new of rectangle, it is going to call inside default constructor. That means this constructor is called. When I am writing R2 is equal to new of rectangle 10 comma 20, then this constructor is going to be called here. Okay, so what is happening here, how it is called here? Normally any method, so let me write one method here, public void display, and in this I am going to display system.out.println, and I am going to say length is equal to plus length, and displaying the value of length and breadth. System.out.println plus len. Similarly, I am going to say system.println. So spelling is mistake here. Okay. So now I am printing the value of length and breadth here. So let me say BRED. Okay, and I am going to say breadth. Breadth is equal to breadth. So now how will this display function display the value here? Unless otherwise you say R1 dot display and R2 dot display, it will not call here. So now when I am running this application, you can see that first this is going to be R1's value, that is length and breadth are equal to 0. So you have instantiated R1 by using new of rectangle, which means that you have not passed any value, but in the constructor we have said length is equal to 0 and breadth is equal to 0. That's why that R1 dot display is going to give you 0 and 0 here. Second time when I say R2 is equal to new of rectangle 10 comma 20. So 10 and 20 is stored in length and breadth in the initialize constructor. So when I declare like this, when I instantiate an object by passing 10 and 20 here for this R2, when I'm doing that, this constructor is going to be called, that is initialize or parameterized constructor is going to be called. The value of length and breadth is going to be assigned as 10 and 20 here. So now when I say R1 dot display, it is displaying length is equal to 0 and breadth is equal to 0. When I say R2 dot display, it is displaying length is equal to 10 and breadth is equal to 20 here. What you need to understand from here is, any method, take a method what I have written here, any method which is written within this particular class should be explicitly called when I am in the main program by using an object. So I am calling this display function by using R1, and I am calling this display function using R2 here. If I don't call this one by using, if I don't do an explicit call to display, it will not display the values here. It will only display the constructor calling here. So the constructors, whenever it is declared, it will be called implicitly, and any method which is written here should be explicitly called. Explicitly called means you have to write the code to call the function called as display. But in case of a constructor, depending upon what type of constructor you are, what type of method you are using it for instantiating, depending upon that the corresponding constructor will be called here. So that's why you don't have to call explicitly, it is called as an implicit call. Okay, so constructors are implicitly called, but the normal methods are not going to be called implicitly, but it should be explicitly called by writing the code. Okay, so that is the difference between a member function and the rectangle, that is a constructor here. But otherwise, what is the similarity between the member function and the constructor here? Both are functions. Both are functions, but display function is explicitly called, rectangle constructor is going to be called depending upon, it will be called implicitly depending upon how you are going to instantiate an object. Okay. So with that program you understand different types of constructor. At the same time, what is the difference between a normal member function and a constructor. Okay, the basic understanding is that the normal member function should be explicitly called and a constructor will be called implicitly. Okay. Okay, this is what we have seen here. Okay, this is an example which we have seen here. Now let us write one more program, or let us write a constructor. Okay, employee display. Okay, let us write one constructor here. Okay, let us understand more about the constructor here. Like for example, if you don't have a default constructor in our class, by default when you compile a Java file, okay, .java file, the compiler itself will put bike, I mean it itself will put one constructor here. That constructor will be a default constructor. Okay, so how do you understand this concept? Okay, let us assume that you don't have a, okay, you don't have any constructor here. You don't have any constructor here, so you cannot declare this object like this. So you are going to give the object in this way. So by default, when I am going to declare an object, what is going to happen here is, by default when I am compiling this program, by default it will have the default constructor. It will initialize the values length and breadth to 0 and 0. Okay, see here I am not initialized the values here, R1 and R2. I have just declared this one. I am just calling R1 is equal to new of rectangle and R2 is equal to new of rectangle, which means that I have not done anything. Length is equal to 0 or breadth is equal to 0. So I have just removed this two constructors here. Even after removing this constructor, you can see that the rectangle R1 display and R2 display is going to have the length and breadth as 0 and 0 here. Okay, so by default a compiler, whenever a Java file is being compiled by the Java compiler, it will automatically put a default constructor like this. So it will automatically put here a rectangle constructor here. Okay, so that is the concept here. So you should understand that whenever I write any class, okay, and if I am going to compile that program and I am using that particular class in the main, and if I am going to compile that .java file, for every class it will put the default constructor. Okay, now let us come back to another example. Let us come to the slide, then we will go to the example here. Let us do like this: Java constructor with the Java method. So what is the difference between Java constructor and a Java method? Okay, Java constructor. Constructor is used to initialize the state of an object. The method is used to expose the behavior of the object here. Maybe here you can say display function is a Java method, I mean class method, and Java constructor is nothing but it is going to be the same name as a class here. It is used to initialize the state of the class. Constructor does not have any return type. So a method can have return type. Okay, at least void should be mentioned here. If you look at this example here, this doesn't have any return value, but I cannot say void. If I say void, it is a warning. Okay, it is a warning here. So you should not use this void before that one. A constructor without a void you can write it, but display function with void you should have it Okay, for example, if I remove this one, what is going to happen here? It is going to give an error. So it should have a return type here. So you should say void. When I say void here, this doesn't return any value here. But whenever I say return value here void, why it is saying a warning? Rectangle is never used. Okay, this I will tell you why it is giving an error. I mean, it's giving a warning here. Okay, so any constructor, whenever you declare in the class, you should not mention void before that, even though it is not returning any value. It doesn't return any value, but you should not say void before the constructor. But in the display function, we have to mention void here, because it doesn't have any it doesn't show you accept without a return value here. So you have to say void. So if I say void here, which means that display function is not returning any value here. So that is what it says here. Constructor should not have a return type, but a method should have a return type. At least you should say void here if you are not returning any value. Constructor is invoked implicitly. Okay, as we have seen that one. Whenever you when you declare an object itself, like for example, when I say R1 when I say R1 is equal to new of rectangle, this itself is calling the constructor, corresponding constructor. If I am going to say initialize 10 comma 20, so this 10 comma 20 is passed to this one. So accordingly it is going to call this constructor. Okay, so this display R1 and R2 is going to be available to it. But in display function you are calling explicitly with an object. You have an object and that object is going to be called. Okay, next is Java compiler provides the default constructor if you don't have it. That is what we have seen in the last slide. If you don't have any constructor, by default it will put a default constructor and the values will be initialized there. Constructor must have same name as the class. So as we have seen that this class name at the same time the rectangle, that is the constructor name, are going to be same. Okay, but in case of Java method, that is a method which is available inside the class, can have a different name. So this display is not same as rectangle here. Okay, next what you are going to see here is that with a constructor, can I copy the value? Yes, we can copy the value here. How will I do that one? Okay, so here I have written one example, student, and I have ID for the student and the name for the student. Student 6, I have integer I and string n. So I am passing some values here and I am going to go to this one. And similarly I have student 6 and s. So I am passing this s dot id and s dot this one. That means I can pass one student object itself to the constructor, and within that constructor I can copy the values. So this is actually called as a copy constructor, we can say, and by using a display we can display the values. So let me do one thing here. Here itself I am going to do one more example. Before going to the copy constructor, what I am going to do is I am going to give one example. Assume that I am removing default constructor only. If I am removing default constructor, but I am having initialize constructor here. Okay, so what will happen here? Whenever I declare a variable or whenever I instantiate an object, R1 is equal to new of rectangle, it will try to find a constructor of which is of default type. Okay, so if that is not available, then it will give an error here. Okay, so if you are writing an initialize constructor, we should have an object when we should have an default constructor like this, return to be, it is a compulsory to be returned. If you are not going to have any rectangle default constructor, you cannot declare this one. So always you should use only initialize constructor only. If you do this one, then the values, there is no error here, but you cannot declare instantiate an object of rectangle by normal way of rectangle open bracket close bracket. If you are going to use this one, then you should have the default constructor. So default constructor is almost considered to be a compulsory one. Okay, if you are not going to write this compulsory one, then you don't have to, you should not declare in the similar way. You should be declaring like R2 only if you are not going to have a default constructor. Now I am going to introduce a copy constructor R3. I will say R3 here. Remember here this rectangle R1 and R2, R3 are there. R1 and R2 are already instantiated. R3 is only reference variable is available and you don't have any object assigned to it. Now I am going to create an object. How I am going to create an object? Whatever value I have passed to 10 and 20, I wanted to show to R3. So one way of doing it is you can just say R3 is equal to new of rectangle. If I want to have the same value of R2, then I can put 10 comma 20. So it is going to be same as your R2 here. Both will be same. But instead you already initialize the values of length and breadth of R2 by using 10 and 20. I wanted to have whatever you have initialized in R2, I wanted to have it in R3. So in that case I wanted to pass R2 to it. When I do this one, R2 means I am passing a different type of variable. Here I am passing two integer variable, so there is no problem. I already have an constructor like this. But here I don't have R2 type. So what you have to do is you have to write your rectangle constructor by using the R2 as a parameter to be passed. So rectangle, here I will be saying rectangle x. Okay. Now here length is equal to x dot l, x dot length, and here x dot breadth. Okay. So this is not going to be called as an initialized parameter. It is also called as an initialized parameter, but since you are able to, you are trying to take the same value of R2 in R3, I am going to say that it is going to be a copying constructor. So it is going to be a copying constructor. Now if I display the value of R3 dot display, what it is going to happen here is it is going to display the value of R3, but it will have the same values of R2 now. Okay. So R1 is going to be 0 comma 0, length and breadth is going to be 0 and 0. R2 is equal to 10 and 20, R3 is equal to 10 and 20 because you are passing the R2 object here and you are assigning here in this one. Okay. So let me run this application. When I say when I run this application, the first display is R1's display, which is 0 comma 0, R2 is having 10 and 20, and R3 is also having 10 and 20 because you have passed R2 to R3. Okay. So you may call this one as what do you say, a copy constructor. However, it is not very similar to the copy constructor which is available in C++. Okay. What are the other ways in which you can copy? Okay, I can also do like this. I can just say, instead of doing this one, instead of doing this way, I will not assign anything to this. R3 is equal to R2. Can I say like this? Yes, you can do that one. But however, there are only two objects are instantiated. One is for R1 and R2, but R3 is referring to the second object which is instantiated here. Okay. So if you run this one, it is going to be same way, it is going to have the same result, but this is going to call the different constructor when you are doing like this. When you are doing like this, it is going to call the different constructor here. Okay, so R3 is equal to new of rectangle R2, so it is going to call this constructor and it is going to take the values of R2 into R3. Okay, so this is what is the example for constructor to copy. Okay, the same example here I have written here. I have written a student here at the same time, student new student of S1. S1 is done here, S1 S2 is having the same value of S2 here. Now here I have already told you about, if you have an initialized constructor, you should have a default constructor. If you don't have a default constructor, no issues, but you should always instantiate an object with the initialized parameters only. Without that you cannot do that. That is what this slice says about. Does the constructor return any value? We have here, if you just look at this one, there are three constructors here: rectangle, rectangle integer L comma B, you have rectangle, rectangle X. Okay, this is a default constructor, this is a parameterized constructor, and this is going to be copy constructor. Okay, does it return any value? Yes, it returns a value. Okay, because it says that whenever I say employee E1, new of employee, so what is going to happen here? It is going to instantiate an object, and the object's address is passed to this E1. Okay, so there is an address which is passed to this E1 here. Similarly, here also you have new employee with this parameters, with the parameters here. It is going to instantiate an object, and that object's address is passed to this E2. E1 and E2 are nothing but they are the reference variables. This E1 is pointing to this instantiation, E2 is pointing to this instantiation. So if you look at this any of the constructors, it returns a value which is nothing but it is going to be a pointer, or it is going to be an address of the object which is instantiated outside the class. Okay, now this is all about the constructors. So constructors, we have different types. One is going to be default constructor, other one is going to be parameterized constructor. We can also write a constructor with for copying it by just saying you can pass the object itself to the constructor, and you can do the initialization, which is going to be called as a constructor copy. Okay, and these are all the basic understanding we got it from the constructor and the difference between the constructor as well as the Java method. And when you have any class without any constructor, by default it will have one constructor itself. So if you don't have any constructor within that one, it will initialize the values of the variables whatever you have declared. Okay, now let us go to another concept called as inheritance. Okay, what is inheritance? Inheritance is basically a mechanism in which an object acquires all the properties of the parent class. Acquires all the properties of the parent class. Of course, this all the properties, I will just underline this one. Depending upon what type of property it is in the parent class, depending upon that it will acquire it. Okay. So inheritance is an idea of creating a new class based on the existing class. Inheritance refers to the parent-child relationship. So what are the advantages of that one? You are overriding, you can achieve runtime polymorphism. You also have something called as code reusability. Okay, so let us take some example. Let us work on the example. Before going to working on the examples, we will see what are the, how do you extend a class, how do you do the inheritance. Okay, if a class is already existing, class is already existent and the name of the class is going to be super class name. Okay, I can create a new class subclass name extends superclass name. So already some class is existing and that class from that class I want to take all the properties. When I am creating a new class, I have to say extend the, I have to use a keyword called as extends from the main class here or the parent class. So here the class which is inherited is actually called as superclass and the class which is created, newly created, is actually called as a child class here. So now we will see one small example here. I am going to explain you about two examples here in this. Okay, so with that two examples you will understand how it is, how the inheritance will work. So here I have a class called as employee. Okay, I have a class called as employee and I have a float variable, float salary is equal to something. I have initialized the value here. Okay, so class programmer extends employee, that is I have written a new class called as programmer and it is getting extended, I mean it is extended from employee here, which means that whatever is the property here, whatever is available here, float is available, no, so that will also be available to me here. It is an extension, programmer is an extension of the employee, so this salary will also be available to me here. So I am having private integer bonus is equal to 10,000 here. So when I say public void display, I am saying system.out.println, I am displaying the salary also at the same time, bonus also I am displaying it here. So inside this particular class, inside this programmer class, I have only one variable called as bonus, which is having 10,000 value. Okay, but I don't have a salary here, but I am printing this salary also within this particular display function because the programmer class is it is extended from employee. When I am extending from the employee, that float salary also will be available to me in the programmer class. Okay, so let us take this example and see how it is done. Java application, I will call it as inherit. Okay, so let me call same example, I will write it class employee. So here I will say float salary is equal to 4,000, 40,000. Okay, so I have written that. Okay, now what I am going to do is I am going to extend something, extend my class. Okay, programmer extends employee. So since I am saying class programmer extends employee, this salary, whatever is the member of this employee called employee class, is being extended to the programmer. That means this property also will be available to me. So I am saying private here, private float bonus is equal to something like this. Now what I am going to do is I am going to write a public function, public void display. Within this display function I am going to display two things. One is system.out.println. Here I am going to say salary is equal to what? Okay, then system.out.println and within that bonus is equal to, okay, So here T is left, that's the reason it is giving an error. So now I am printing both salary and bonus here. I am not seeing that the salary is I am not seeing that salary is an error here, even though this salary is not available within the class. So this programmer class doesn't have a salary here, but actually it inherits salary from the employee. The property of the employee comes to this programmer. Okay, so that's why I am able to print this one. So what you will do is, if I am declaring an object of employee type, I have only salary there. Okay, I don't have any methods, but when I say float salary, which means that it is going to be public, okay, and it is accessible through the object. So if I declare an employee, it doesn't have much functionality within that, but if I declare an programmer object, I have salary, I have bonus, I have display function to display both the values. So what I will do is, I will declare an object of programmer P1, okay, and P1 is equal to new of programmer. Now I am not having any constructor here in the programmer or in the employee. So what is going to happen here? New of programmer is going to instantiate an object. So with this P1, I can call display function. Okay, I can call a display function here. So if I run this application, you can see that the salary and bonus is displayed. So salary is 40,000 and bonus is 60,000. So you can see salary and bonus is displayed here. Now you see that in the programmer P1 is of type programmer class. Okay, it's an object of programmer. So but programmer doesn't have the bonus value here. But you have P1, you have instantiated that one, and I'm displaying the I'm calling this display function. In that I'm displaying the salary and bonus. Since you have extended from the employee, your salary is also available to you here. Okay, so what happens if I make this as private? What happens if I make this private here? Do you see any error here in this place? Yes, if you look at this one, salary is private, accessible only in the employee. Okay, so by default, when I don't give this public here, which means that it is public only. By default it is public when I am doing it. So but when I say public here, when I am extending the public methods or variables, it will come as a public here, and you will be in a position to access that. Okay, so you have salary, and that is been declared as public here. When I am extending that, the public values will be available to you in the programmer. But in case of private, what happens here is, it is going to be available to you only in the employee. Because it is private, it will be available to you only in the employee class only. It will not be available to you in the programmer class. Even though you have extended from the employee, private variables will not be in a position to access that. Okay, so what happens if I say protected? If I say protected, you can see that it is not available to, it is not giving any error, because you see the protected members are available to you in the extended class. That is, when I am inheriting the protected member from a base class, that is the employee class, the programmer will also have it as a protected only. So it will be available to you in the programmer class. So the output is going to be same. Okay, so unless otherwise, if I say private here, it will give an error saying that salary is not available, because it is private member and it is private to the class only. Even if you extend it, private members will not be extended, or it will not be inherited from the base class. Okay, so you should understand, when this is public, it will be available to you in the extended class. If I am making it as private, it will not be available to you in the extended class, but when I say protected, it will be available as a protected member in the extended class. Okay, so this is one of the example for inheritance. Now let us do, I have a private member. So since it is private member, the salary is going to be private here, you cannot access that. You cannot access the employee. But how will I do that? I wanted to make this salary as private, but I wanted to access this salary here in the extended class. What I can do is I can have a display function. So let this function be public void disp. Okay, and you will display the value of salary here. Okay, so this is a public function. The public function can access the private members of the same class. So I am writing a public function here, and this function is going to display the value of salary here. But in case if I look at the main program, I am having a programmer object, and the programmer object p1 dot new programmer, p1 dot display is possible. Can I say p1 dot disp? Can I say p1.disk? Yes, it is possible because it is public. Whenever there is a public function or public member in the base class, that is employee class, when it is extended to the programmer, this display function will also be available to you. Okay, so instead of doing this one, I can just make it even available to you in the display function itself. You just call display here. Can call display here. This display is nothing but this member. This is not the member of programmer, but it is a member of employee. But since programmer is extended from the employee, public members will come to you as a public member here, and you can call that public member within the public method, and that public method can be called from the main. So what is going to happen here? It is also going to give me the same output, salary and bonus here. Okay, so if there is a private member, you want to declare explicitly as a private member in a base class, that is the employee class, and you should have a member to access that. So you have a public member disp to access this salary. You have this one, and then when you are extending it, you can use this display here. Either you can use your display here, or this p1 also can access the display here in this case. Okay, that is what is the second method what we have written here, second program. Okay, so what did you understand from this? We have understood that whenever I have a class and I have another class which is extended from the parent class, what is going to happen is you get all the properties of the parent class to the child class. Okay, always a parent class is called as base class, and the class which is inherited from the base class is actually called as a derived class. Okay, so this is the concept of inheritance. Next, let us see about different types of inheritance. There are different types of inheritance. This is called as single inheritance. Okay, so single inheritance means you have a base class. Base class is actually a parent class. You have a base class and you have class B which is derived from class A. So it is called a single inheritance. Okay, you have multi-level inheritance. Okay, let us come to single inheritance, multi-level. So you have class A, class B. Class B is derived from class A and class C is derived from class B. So this is called as multi-level inheritance. Hierarchical inheritance, you have class A, class B and class C are both are derived from class A only. Okay, multiple or hybrid inheritance. You have class A and class B. Class C is derived from class A at the same time class B. Okay, this is actually called as multiple inheritance. And you have hybrid, which is very similar. It is a combination of both multiple inheritance and the actually the single inheritance. Sorry, multiple inheritance and multi-level hierarchical inheritance. So you have a hierarchical inheritance here, and you have multiple inheritance here. Okay. Thank you. This is what we are going to discuss. We have discussed about inheritance, at the same time the constructors. In inheritance, we have seen about different types of inheritance. We have taken two examples to understand the concept of inheritance. Okay. In the next video, what we are going to see is how this multiple inheritance, hybrid inheritance, we can see some examples. At the same time, if I am having an inheritance and if I have the constructors within the base class and the derived class, what is going to happen? Okay, this is what we are going to see in the next class. But in this class, we have just understood the concept of constructor, at the same time inheritance. Thank you. Bye.